Hello everyone. Tonight, I'm going to tell you something that history books were never allowed to print. Beneath the Sahara, under miles of silence and sand, may lie the ruins of a civilization older than Egypt, older than Sumer, a society so advanced and so influential that it might have shaped the entire ancient world. But someone made sure we'd forget. So set your pillow and blanket and relax your mind. You're safe now. You're ready to travel back into a past that was almost erased. And before we start, if you genuinely enjoy my work, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what time are you watching this. Let's begin. The Sahara is vast, so vast that it could swallow entire countries whole. It stretches across 11 nations, covering more land than the United States. A dry, dead ocean of sand, but for something so unimaginably large, it holds almost nothing about its past. Or, that's what we've always been told. For centuries, people believed the Sahara was always like this, hot, lifeless, unchanging. But recently, whispers have begun to surface, not from the mouths of men, but from the sands themselves. And what they reveal might change everything. From the sky, something strange begins to appear. NASA satellites, equipped with powerful infrared and radar systems, scan the Sahara for climate data, but instead they find patterns, geometric, symmetrical, deliberate, not sand dunes, not rock formations, lines, circles, rectangles, foundations. These shapes stretch for miles, sometimes forming massive grids invisible to the human eye from the ground, perfectly aligned structures that defy nature's randomness. For a while, scientists assumed it was a trick of light, or maybe a strange erosion pattern caused by wind, but these anomalies were consistent, repeatable, and more importantly, too precise. Zooming in further, researchers found strange cold spots buried under the sand, places where the ground retained heat differently, where radar bounced off flat surfaces far beneath the dunes, structures, roads, something ancient slumbering beneath layers of time. Some of the patterns resembled city blocks, others looked like buried walls or long-forgotten roads. And then came the speculation, could there be an ancient civilization buried beneath the Sahara? A culture lost so completely that even our myths forgot it. It sounds impossible until you learn that the Sahara wasn't always a desert. Just 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, this unforgiving land was green. Rain fell here. Trees grew. Lakes spread across the horizon. The region we now call the Sahara was once home to forests, animals, and people. Scientists call this period the African Humid Period. But what they don't talk about, at least not publicly, is how advanced those people may have been. In ancient cave paintings discovered in the mountains of Algeria and Niger, we see images of boats, cattle, dancers, hunters, not primitive stick figures. These were expressive, detailed, and alive. Men riding animals that no longer live in these regions. Women gathering near rivers that are now only dry memories. Art that suggests not only survival, but civilization. But then, almost without warning, the green vanished, the lakes dried, the trees died, the people disappeared, and the sands came. What happened? This question becomes more haunting when you realize how little evidence remains. If millions once lived in this green Sahara, where are their cities, their temples, their graves? Civilizations like Egypt left behind pyramids, writing, and monuments. Why did the people of the Sahara leave nothing? Unless they didn't. Unless their cities weren't destroyed, but buried. In 2015, an amateur researcher using Google Earth found something strange deep in Mauritania. A massive spiral formation, nearly 30 miles across, perfectly circular with concentric rings, known today as the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara. This massive geological formation puzzled scientists for decades. It was dismissed as a natural formation, just rock, just coincidence. But when compared to Plato's description of Atlantis, a city of concentric rings, surrounded by mountains to the north and open to the sea to the south, the similarities were hard to ignore. Too hard. Other ancient maps from Arab explorers and early European travelers showed even more, places where no cities exist today, but once were marked as capitals. The famed city of Zerzura, the White City of legend, described in Arabic texts as a city of riches hidden in the desert, still remains unaccounted for. Why did so many old maps label entire regions of the Sahara with names of cities, rivers, and even roads? And then there are the burial grounds. In Niger's Gobero site, archaeologists discovered a cemetery buried under sand dunes. Human remains, dating back almost 9,000 years, were found, some positioned in intricate ritualistic ways, others buried with jewelry and weapons. These weren't aimless nomads. These were organized people with culture, belief systems, and possibly social hierarchy. But what's most troubling is the scale. Thousands of bodies, but no sign of the city they came from. Satellite scans have since revealed dozens of similar burial clusters across the desert. Not random, not scattered, but concentrated zones, clusters of life hidden beneath death. There are whispers of other signs too. In southern Algeria, strange dome-shaped shadows under the sand. Some believe they could be tombs. Others say bunkers. A few theorists even wonder if they are something else entirely. Repositories of knowledge hidden intentionally. For what purpose? Protection? Secrecy? Or maybe because they knew something we didn't? Climate change alone cannot explain how a vibrant, thriving, lake-filled region turned into hellish wasteland. It also cannot explain how their cities vanished so completely. Deserts don't just eat stone overnight. And yet, no ruins remain. Some researchers have theorized that the shift to desert happened far more suddenly than expected, possibly caused by a comet impact, a solar flare, or even a man-made disaster from a forgotten age. If this sounds too strange, remember this. We only recently learned that humanity once had cousins, entire human species that lived alongside us, and we never knew until bones were found. We only recently discovered cities under the Amazon jungle that were completely overgrown. Our past is far more fragile than we think, and memory even more so. Could the Sahara be the greatest cover-up of all time? It would explain why certain regions, especially in Algeria and Mali, are so heavily restricted. Areas where no official excavations have ever been allowed, where even Google Earth's highest resolution scans go blurry. Coincidence or convenience? What if the stories of the Sahara we've been told are just a layer, a surface-level truth, and underneath it lies something we weren't supposed to see? Imagine a city more advanced than we thought possible for the time, built not from ego like the pyramids, but from knowledge, a place of silence and study, a center for ancient astronomy, medicine, or even technologies we've long since forgotten. And then, something went wrong. Maybe the climate collapsed faster than they could adapt, or maybe they were destroyed by enemies who left no trace, or maybe, just maybe, they buried themselves. Not just their bodies, but their culture. A voluntary erasure, a vanishing act so complete that only the sand remembers. And now, with modern eyes in the sky, with heat-sensitive radar and deep penetrating sensors, the past is starting to rise again, piece by piece, line by line, whisper by whisper. Every satellite scan, every blurred map, every uncovered skeleton in the middle of nowhere adds to a puzzle, and the edges are beginning to show. This was not just an empty desert. This was once a living, breathing world, and now the silence is cracking. The patterns are speaking, the bones are surfacing, and the sands are whispering. But the question remains, what if something was buried so deeply we forgot it ever existed? It's hard to imagine the Sahara as anything other than what it is today, an endless furnace of wind and silence, a place where time dries up and vanishes like footprints in the sand. When people think of the Sahara, they picture waves of golden dunes, cracked earth, and a horizon that never seems to end. But this wasn't always true. There was a time not very long ago in the grand calendar of Earth's history when this desert was green. A time when trees danced in the breeze and rain fell like whispers from the sky. A time when rivers flowed, lakes shimmered, and the air smelled of wet earth and blooming life. Scientists call it the African Humid Period. But what it really was a lost world, a world we barely remember, a world that existed just 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, a blink of an eye. And yet, almost nothing of it remains. No stories passed down, no great monuments, no names carved in stone, only a strange quiet and the haunting question, where did they all go? At first, the evidence was scattered. Ancient lake beds in the heart of the Sahara, long since dried up, revealed fossilized fish bones, freshwater shells, and even remnants of hippos. Yes, hippos, thriving in what is now one of the hottest places on Earth. But then came the images, captured from the sky. Satellite data began showing something extraordinary. Dark, dried channels running across the desert, twisting and branching like ancient veins. These weren't random. They were rivers, gigantic ones, some of them rivaling the size of the Nile, buried under dunes for thousands of years. As scientists traced their paths, they realized that the Sahara had once been a web of flowing life. Rivers that fed vast floodplains, basins that held freshwater lakes the size of modern-day European countries. One such lake, known today as Mega Lake Chad, was once bigger than the entire Caspian Sea. Its shores may have been home to hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people. But the strangest thing wasn't the rivers or the lakes. It was what they found painted on the walls of stone. In the highlands of the central Sahara, particularly in regions like Tassili Najjer in southeastern Algeria, explorers discovered caves filled with paintings, not primitive stick drawings, but detailed, expressive artwork, human figures with emotion, animals drawn with care, scenes that told stories. These were not the images of a dying people scraping out survival in a wasteland. These were memories of life, of celebration, ritual, and routine. One image shows a line of people herding cattle beneath towering trees. Another shows men in boats paddling through waters that no longer exist. Elephants, giraffes, antelope, and even crocodiles appear frequently in the artwork, animals that need lush environments to survive. The paintings also depict dances, social gatherings, women giving birth, and what appears to be a spiritual connection between the people and the world around them. These people were not just surviving, they were thriving. So what happened? The common belief is that the Earth's tilt shifted slightly over thousands of years, changing the intensity of the monsoon rains that once bathed the Sahara. As the rains withdrew, slowly, year by year, century by century, the green began to fade. Forests turned to grasslands, grasslands to scrub, scrub to sand. But recent data paints a different picture. It suggests the change might not have been so slow. Some areas may have dried up in less than a century. For a society dependent on seasonal rains and river-fed agriculture, such a rapid shift could mean chaos, famine, migration, collapse, and maybe even erasure. But the question remains, why did they leave no trace? Civilizations like Egypt, born around the same time, left pyramids and tombs, temples and writing. But the people of the Green Sahara left only whispers, no ruins, no scripts, only bones and paintings. In some places, stone circles have been discovered, such as those found near Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, close to the Sudanese border. These circles are older than Stonehenge. Some researchers believe they served as astronomical calendars, used to track the movement of the stars, the seasons, and maybe the rains themselves. If this is true, it means the people of the Green Sahara were not only herders and hunters, they were astronomers. Think about that. A society living in harmony with the land, tracking the skies, painting stories in stone, and then vanishing. Further south, in present-day Niger, the site of Gobero was discovered in the early 2000s. There, buried beneath ancient dunes, archaeologists found a cemetery dating back nearly 10,000 years. Over 200 skeletons were uncovered, many in carefully arranged positions, some mothers holding children, others laid to rest with jewelry made of shells carried from oceans thousands of kilometers away. These were not primitive savages. They were people of culture, ritual, and belief. And yet, once again, no cities, no temples, just bones in sand. As the climate shifted, some may have moved east, toward the Nile, giving rise to the early cultures of Egypt. Others may have moved south, into the Sahel, and deeper into sub-Saharan Africa. And some perhaps perished with their world, choosing not to abandon the land they once called paradise. But still, the mystery deepens, because even in places that should have preserved something, tools, writings, settlements, we find almost nothing. It's as if someone erased them. As if the Sahara didn't just become a desert, but became a vault. A vault meant to seal off a chapter of human history. Why? What were they hiding? What were they protecting? Or is it simply that the sands are too thick, too heavy, too stubborn to give up their secrets? There are theories. Some believe the Green Sahara civilization was not just advanced for its time, but too advanced, that their knowledge of the stars, weather, and environment suggests a culture far older than we currently accept. Others think they may have possessed a form of proto-writing, symbols and marks passed on through rock art and oral tradition, now lost forever. A few even whisper of forbidden knowledge, that something was discovered or known that should have stayed buried. The paintings in Tassili Najar are particularly strange. Among the usual scenes of daily life, there are odd figures, tall, round-headed beings with large eyes and no mouths. Some look like they wear suits or helmets. Others float above the ground. Ancient alien theorists claim this is evidence of extraterrestrial contact. But even if we leave those theories aside, the images are undeniably bizarre. Could they have been gods? Spirits? Symbols of something now forgotten? Whatever they were important enough to be painted over and over. And yet, despite all this, the rivers, the lakes, the animals, the art, the burials, the Green Sahara remains one of the least discussed chapters in human history. It's rarely mentioned in schools. Most documentaries skip over it. Most maps show only sand. But this land was once alive. It had rhythm. It had memory. It had people who laughed, danced, worshipped, worked, and died just like we do. Their world ended. Not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating silence. And here's the part that should chill you. We are only just beginning to uncover it. With each new satellite scan, each LiDAR sweep, each excavation under a dune, we get another fragment, another clue, but never the full picture. It's like trying to remember a dream after waking up. You know it was real. You feel it in your bones, but it slips through your fingers. The Green Sahara may hold more than just ancient stories. It may hold answers. Answers about who we were before history began, before writing, before kingdoms, before war. Perhaps these people were the ancestors of the Nile cultures, the West African empires, or even the forgotten desert tribes that left only stories behind. Perhaps they gave rise to the gods we now read about in mythologies, or perhaps they were something else entirely, a branch of humanity that chose not to build upward, but inward, not to leave monuments, but messages, messages buried in stone, in art, in stars. And now, with the tools of modern science, we are slowly peeling back the layers. But with each discovery, the question grows louder. Who were these people, and why did they leave no trace? There are places in the world so forgotten, so veiled in silence, that even time seems afraid to speak of them. Places where maps turn vague, where sand erases memory, and where every grain hides the secrets of a world no longer ours. The Central Sahara is one of those places, deep beneath the golden waves that stretch across Algeria, Libya, and Mauritania. Something stirs, silent, still and strangely shaped. Not dunes, not rocks, but something more deliberate, more structured, something human. In recent years, aided by LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, and thermal imaging from high above, researchers have started seeing beneath the surface. What they've found is astonishing. Shadows of cities long lost, massive geometric patterns stretching across the emptiest corners of the desert, far from any known historical civilization. Square outlines resembling building foundations, long lines like roads, and massive circular formations, some as wide as football stadiums, buried under meters of sand. They appear in places where no recorded empire, kingdom, or even tribe was known to exist. And yet, they are there, silent, patient, untouched, as if waiting. The first signs were almost dismissed. Explorers flying over remote regions of Mauritania noticed strange lines in the sand, lines too straight to be natural. Initially assumed to be old caravan trails, they were soon revealed, under closer satellite study, to be buried walls. Some stretched for kilometers, and they weren't random. They formed enclosed perimeters, grid-like streets, courtyard-like areas, entire city blocks, flattened and hidden. Over time, more appeared. In the Algerian desert, hidden near ancient dry riverbeds, there were wide circular ridges beneath the sand. LiDAR images showed layered structures like rings, almost like arenas or temples. These weren't isolated incidents. Similar formations were spotted in southern Libya, always far from any water source, modern town, or known archaeological site. But they all had one thing in common. They were built with intention. Someone, thousands of years ago, had carved cities into the land and then vanished without a trace. The Sahara is notorious for swallowing the past. Sandstorms can bury entire villages in days. Over centuries, cities can vanish from sight, their walls worn to nothing, their roofs flattened, their streets filled with silence. But radar doesn't lie. LiDAR doesn't see illusions. What they picked up were layered foundations, multi-level complexes with uniform measurements, right angles, and defined perimeters. In some places, the outlines of what might have been temples or marketplaces. In others, mysterious ringed formations with central pits, possibly wells, gathering spaces, or something more symbolic. And in a few rare areas, satellite scans revealed signs of roads, long, straight paths that connected one buried site to another across hundreds of kilometers, following no modern logic and serving no modern town. Then came the testimonies from desert tribes, nomads who had lived near these zones for generations. Some spoke of strange stone fields partially exposed after heavy winds. Others told stories of cursed cities swallowed by the earth, of ancient peoples who lived in the dunes before the desert came, whose gods were angry and whose names were forgotten. A few even told of explorers who went looking and never came back. Whether myth or memory, their stories pointed in the same direction: something lies beneath. One of the most intriguing findings came from an expedition team in 2018 using drone-assisted LiDAR in Mauritania. What they discovered was shocking. A symmetrical layout resembling a central hub with 4 radiating corridors extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. It bore a striking resemblance to early urban planning found in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. But this was the Sahara, hundreds of miles from any known culture of the time. No ruins above ground, no mention in any ancient texts, no record of who might have lived there. And yet, the precision, the scale, the symmetry, it was unmistakably the work of human hands. Digging, however, proved nearly impossible. The desert is merciless. Heat rises to unbearable levels. Sand shifts unpredictably, and many of these locations sit in politically unstable or restricted regions. In Algeria and Libya, military zones overlap much of the suspected territory. Foreign research teams are rarely granted access, and even when they are, funding dries up before the sand does. But the few who've managed to extract samples report the same thing: traces of ancient pottery, fragments of tools and stones that show signs of cutting, shaping, and placement. These weren't random piles of rocks. These were buildings, neighborhoods, perhaps even cities. What makes it more mysterious is that no names have been found, no inscriptions, no written language, nothing that connects these sites to any known group. Egypt left hieroglyphs. Mesopotamia left cuneiform. The Nubians, the Berbers, even the early Saharan tribes had symbols. But these lost cities are blank. It's as if they were never meant to be remembered, or someone made sure they wouldn't be. Some theorists believe these cities could predate Egypt, that they were part of a pre-Nile civilization that flourished during the Green Sahara period, before the rains stopped. Others suggest they were colonies of a larger forgotten empire, one that stretched across the Sahara and collapsed under environmental catastrophe. And then there are those who whisper of forbidden knowledge, civilizations with understandings of astronomy, climate, and earth energy that surpass what we assume possible for the time. They point to the precision of the structures, the alignment with ancient star paths, and the resemblance to other megalithic sites around the world. Could this have been a civilization wiped out, not just by nature but by design? When asked why these discoveries haven't made headlines, most experts shrug. Too remote, they say. Too little data. Not enough proof. But is that really the reason, or is there something more? When you start connecting the dots, a darker pattern emerges. Many of the most compelling locations are under governmental control, restricted airspace, military zones. In Libya, several areas that once showed strange radar anomalies have since been blurred out on Google Earth. In Algeria, requests for archaeological digs near certain buried structures were denied without explanation. In Mauritania, nomads have reported seeing foreign teams briefly enter the desert with equipment, then disappear, their work never published. Why the silence? Some say it's politics. Others believe it's fear. Fear of what they might find. Because if these cities are real, and if they are as old as the evidence suggests, then our understanding of human history would change. It would mean that civilization didn't begin in Egypt or Mesopotamia, but earlier, somewhere else. It would mean rewriting the textbooks, rethinking everything we know about migration, agriculture, and human development. And not everyone wants that. Not every government is eager to admit they've been sitting on history's greatest secret. Not every scholar wants to admit the theories they spent decades defending might be wrong. But the sand remembers, the earth doesn't lie, and radar has no agenda. With each passing year, more of these buried shadows come into view. Technology advances, private satellites, AI analysis of terrain, and deep sensing drones are all making it harder to keep secrets buried. Yet still, no official large-scale excavation has been permitted in these areas. Not one. Universities quietly fund surface surveys, but they never break ground. National museums acknowledge the anomalies, but list them as natural formations. The story remains untold, the cities remain nameless, and the silence continues. But one has to wonder, if these were truly just natural hills and stones, why the restrictions? Why the secrecy? Why the blurred coordinates? The denied permits? The vanished teams? What is so dangerous about ancient ruins in a desert, unless they contain something the world isn't ready to see? It's possible, of course, that the cities were simply forgotten, that the shifting sands covered them before history began, and we are only now seeing their outlines. But if that were the case, wouldn't we be racing to uncover them? Wouldn't every archaeologist on Earth be drawn to the chance of discovering a lost civilization? And yet, they don't set dig. The Sahara keeps her secrets close. She buries them in silence and guards them with storms. But for those who know where to look, and for those brave enough to ask why the world has looked away for so long, the truth is beginning to whisper through the wind. And it's saying something we were never meant to hear. Because somewhere beneath the sands of Algeria, Libya, and Mauritania lie the bones of cities that have no name, the remnants of a forgotten people, the footprints of something old, something vast, something deliberately erased. And the question that remains, echoing louder with every satellite pass, every radar scan, every buried wall and unseen road is this: why has no country dared to dig further? There's something unsettling about ancient maps, not the ones we draw today with satellites and algorithms, but the hand-drawn parchments of a world that once trusted stars, whispers and memory more than machines. Maps that showed lands before we even knew they existed. Maps filled with creatures we now call myth, cities we've never found, and coastlines shaped centuries before they were officially discovered. Among them, a few stand out, ones that hint, again and again, that the Sahara Desert was never just empty. From Greece to Arabia, from the Islamic Golden Age to the Renaissance, old maps carry traces of something more. Not dunes, not silence, but cities, trade routes, kingdoms with names we don't recognize. Civilizations that supposedly existed in regions now so dry, so dead, so forgotten, that even standing there today makes the idea seem absurd. But the maps are there. The ink is real, and the more you look, the more you realize. History has not just forgotten something, it may have buried it on purpose. One of the most whispered about artifacts in this puzzle is the Piri Reis map, an enigmatic piece of deerskin leather created in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. Most people know it because it appears to show parts of South America and Antarctica long before either were officially charted, but buried in the details of this strange and beautiful map is something even more provocative: the interior of North Africa. Piri Reis drew not just the coastline but rivers, mountain ranges and cities deep within the Sahara. Cities located far inland, in places we now consider uninhabitable. When questioned about his sources, Piri Reis claimed to have used older maps, some Greek, some even older, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He admitted he never personally visited many of the lands he drew. Instead, he trusted the maps of those who came before him. But those maps, where did they come from? What eyes first saw those rivers now dried, those cities now erased? Even further back, the Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, wrote in the 5th century BCE about a mysterious people who lived in the interior of Libya, which for the Greeks included all of North Africa west of Egypt. He described a land of fertile soil, of rivers and lakes, of people who built their homes of salt and fought with fire. He told of great cities far beyond the known boundaries of Carthage and Egypt, cities filled with gold, knowledge and kings. Many dismissed his tales as fantasy, but Herodotus wasn't just a storyteller. He traveled, he asked, he listened, he recorded what locals told him. He wasn't trying to impress with imagination. He believed what he heard, and he heard that the Sahara had once been alive. Centuries later, during the Islamic Golden Age, another chronicler emerged, an Arab geographer named al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century. Al-Bakri never visited the lands he described personally, but he gathered his information from merchants, travelers, and oral histories passed down for generations. In his famous work, Book of Roads and Kingdoms, he spoke of vast empires in the interior of the Sahara. One of the most legendary was the city of Zerzura, a white city, filled with riches, hidden in the desert, ruled by a mysterious queen and protected by armed guardians. He described it as a place of cleanliness, white stone, flowing water, and great knowledge. Zerzura became one of the most elusive legends of the Sahara, inspiring countless expeditions, especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries. But it was never found, or so we're told. Some believe it was swallowed by the sands. Others think it never existed. But then why did so many different cultures write about it? As more maps from the Islamic world, Greece, and even early Europe are gathered and compared, strange consistencies emerge. Repeated names, cities placed along the same coordinates, rivers that no longer exist. One example is the depiction of the Tamanrasset River, an ancient waterway that would have run from the highlands of Algeria toward the Atlantic Ocean, feeding into the so-called Green Sahara. No such river flows today, but satellite imaging has confirmed the dried-up remains of a massive paleo river beneath the sand, precisely where the maps showed it. And if the rivers were real, what else was? In the age of the Renaissance, European cartographers began copying and combining maps from older sources. These maps, like the Cantino Planisphere and the Fray Mauro map, included details from Africa's interior that they couldn't have known firsthand. Yet again, they marked settlements and cities, dots in the middle of what modern maps show as barren dunes. Some maps even noted trade routes, suggesting regular movement of people, goods, perhaps knowledge, through regions we now consider utterly impassable. These weren't random guesses. These were based on records, observations, testimonies. Someone had been there, someone had seen. But then, something changed. Over time, the Sahara began to vanish from maps, not in size but in detail. The dots disappeared. The rivers were erased. The cities were no longer drawn. By the time the colonial powers arrived in Africa, the maps were mostly blank when it came to the interior of the desert. Unknown land, they called it. Unexplored. A dangerous place of emptiness. But was it really unexplored, or had the knowledge been deliberately forgotten? Some suggest the shift was political. As empires rose and borders changed, the memory of older civilizations, ones not tied to modern nations, became inconvenient. A forgotten city meant someone else was here first. A powerful civilization in the Sahara would complicate the neat story of European or Middle Eastern dominance. Others think the reasons were more academic. Archaeologists and historians relying only on physical evidence dismissed the old maps and writings as myth. After all, who trusts a map that shows unicorns and sea monsters? But perhaps in throwing out the fantasy, they discarded the facts as well. There are whispers, too, of suppression, of findings quietly removed from museums, of ruins found and never announced, of excavations halted because they uncovered something unexpected, something that didn't fit the narrative. One explorer in the 1930s, Count Laszlo Almasi, claimed to have found parts of the fabled Zerzura during expeditions across the Egyptian-Libyan border. His writings described valleys with signs of ancient habitation, walls, tombs, even water. But most of his findings were dismissed, even ridiculed. Later, parts of his journals mysteriously vanished. Was he mistaken or silenced? As more ancient maps resurface in private collections and digital archives, researchers are beginning to overlay them with modern satellite imagery, and the results are unsettling. More than a few of the old city markers fall precisely over locations where modern radar now detects buried structures, stone alignments, rectangular shadows, even buried walls. These are not coincidences. These are coordinates. Some of the ancient names, long assumed to be fictional, are aligning with real places, and yet no one is digging. The maps are real. The radar is real. But the silence is louder than ever. Could it be that our timeline is wrong? That the Sahara wasn't just a route between civilizations, but a cradle of one? A place where knowledge bloomed and was buried? Some even believe that during the Green Sahara period, this region may have hosted one of the world's earliest advanced societies, a proto-civilization, one that thrived on seasonal rivers, built astronomical sites, tracked the stars, and spread its influence far beyond what we now recognize. Perhaps its people moved on when the rain stopped. Perhaps they founded other cultures. Or perhaps they stayed and were lost beneath the sands. Either way, they are gone. Their names, if they had them, are missing, their voices erased, and the only memory they left behind may be those old maps created by civilizations that still remembered the ones before them. Modern historians often roll their eyes at these theories. They ask if a civilization existed, where are the ruins? Where are the scripts? The statues? But sometimes forgetting is the point. Sometimes burial is not an accident. Sometimes the best way to hide something is in plain sight. In maps everyone can see but no one believes. If ancient cartographers drew these places from hearsay, then someone had to say it. If ancient texts recorded cities in the desert, someone had to witness them, and if radar today confirms what ink once imagined, then maybe it was never imagination at all. Maybe the maps were right. Maybe Herodotus heard more truth than myth. Maybe El-Bakri's travelers weren't dreamers, but messengers from a world we chose to forget, a world we still refuse to acknowledge. Because to admit those cities existed is to admit our history is incomplete, that our story as a species has missing chapters, important ones, and that the Sahara, far from being a lifeless wasteland, was once home to ideas, trade, beauty, language, and power, and that somewhere beneath those dunes it still is. We follow maps every day. We trust them with our directions, our borders, even our wars, but we forget what maps used to be. They weren't just guides, they were memories, warnings, testimonies, love letters to lost worlds, and sometimes they told stories no one wanted to hear. The Sahara didn't just become empty, it was emptied, and the traces of what it held have been fading ever since. But the maps remember. The stars remember. The stories buried deep in old parchment and forgotten books still call out to us. And now we must ask ourselves, were these just legends, or has history been edited? There are places on Earth that whisper louder than others, places that seem to pull at the edge of your memory even if you've never stood near them, places that feel older than time itself. And in the heart of Mauritania, deep within the Western Sahara, there is one such place, a massive spiral-shaped wound in the earth that has no name in most history books, and yet has become one of the most compelling geographical mysteries of the modern era. Locals call it simply the Eye of the Sahara. Scientists name it the Richat structure. But some believe it is something much more. A final clue, a remnant, a fossil of memory, a map written not in ink or stone, but in the very land itself. For centuries the Eye lay unknown to the outside world, hidden by remoteness and misunderstood as a natural depression. But then came the satellites, and the pictures they sent back sparked something no one could have predicted. A question that refuses to die. Is this where Atlantis once stood? The Eye of the Sahara is enormous, over 40 kilometers in diameter, visible only from high above, like a bullseye stamped into the face of the earth. Its layers form massive concentric rings, like ripples in still water, each band of rock rising and falling in perfect curves. At first glance, it looks like a geological marvel, and that's what most scientists call it. A symmetrical dome caused by erosion, ancient volcanic activity, layers exposed by millions of years of wind and time. But others see more, much more. They see a pattern, a layout, a structure, something built, not just formed. And when those rings are compared to Plato's ancient description of Atlantis, the similarities become almost uncomfortable. Plato, writing over 2,300 years ago, described Atlantis as a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before his time, situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to him, Atlantis was made of concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water, with a central island, bridges connecting the zones and mountains to the north. A fertile plain lay to the south, rich in animals and crops. The city was advanced, wealthy, and proud, until it was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. For centuries, readers believed Plato's tale was allegory, a political warning wrapped in myth. But what if it wasn't? Enter the Richat structure. Though it sits inland, thousands of kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean, the Eye checks box after box in Plato's description. The diameter of the Eye matches Plato's stated size, almost exactly. The rings, alternating elevated and low zones, could have once held water, now long dried. The center of the Eye, a raised platform, mirrors Plato's central island where the royal palace supposedly stood, and to the north of the Eye are the remains of ancient mountain ridges. To the south, a massive plain stretching toward the desert horizon, flat, empty, and curiously fertile in deeper soil samples. Coincidence? Maybe. But the question keeps pulling at the edges of curiosity. Because if Atlantis was real, and if it was ever meant to be found, wouldn't it look exactly like this? Geologists argue, of course, that the eye is purely natural. They point to exposed sedimentary rock, volcanic doming, and erosion as the culprits behind the formation's perfect symmetry. But they also admit something else. The ridge structure is unlike anything else on Earth. There is no other example of such a vast, circular layered dome with such uniform spacing and central elevation, even among Earth's strangest formations. The eye is alone, and then there's the age. Some parts of the structure are estimated to be millions of years old, while others seem to date back to around the time Plato claimed Atlantis was destroyed. But geological time is complex. Layers overlap, dates mix. Still, the location is curiously consistent with ancient maps. Some Renaissance-era drawings place mysterious cities inland from West Africa, arranged in ringed patterns. Many were dismissed as mistakes. But now, with modern satellite imagery, those old cartographic ghosts seem to be echoing something long buried. And then there sets the human element. Artifacts have been found in and around the eye, stone tools, spearheads, and even signs of ancient habitation. They date back thousands of years. Nomadic tribes lived near the structure, and ancient trade routes passed close by. But there's no evidence of great cities, no ruins of palaces, no remnants of the so-called Atlantean technology. So skeptics ask, if this was Atlantis, where's the proof? But others counter. If the destruction was truly as sudden as Plato said, if the sea swallowed it in a single day and night, if sand and time buried everything, would we even recognize the ruins? What if the materials used were not stone and granite, but something more fragile? What if Atlantis wasn't a city of monuments, but of meaning, a symbol of balance, of knowledge, of harmony with the earth? There are stories from the Sahara, passed down by desert tribes, of cities swallowed by sand, of storms that lasted weeks, of gods who punished arrogance with silence, echoes of a fall, echoes of forgetting. And some believe that the eye, with its hypnotic shape and lonely grandeur, was the center of it all, that it wasn't always dry, that water once flowed between the rings, that temples once stood on the central island, that knowledge once lived here and then was lost. The area remains remarkably unexplored, despite the global curiosity stirred by satellite images and documentaries. No major excavation has taken place. The Mauritanian government maintains that the structure is a geological site, not archaeological, but permission for deeper digs has been slow, cautious, even discouraged. Why? What could they fear? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it's just politics and resources. Or perhaps some questions are easier left unanswered. Because if the eye is not natural, if it is the remains of a civilization erased by time, then what does that mean for everything we know? Our timelines, our assumptions, our stories. Some suggest that even if the eye isn't Atlantis, it may be a clue, a waypoint, a monument left behind by a civilization that traveled further than we thought, mapped stars more precisely than we understood, and fell long before Egypt ever rose. What if Plato didn't invent Atlantis, but remembered it? Or more hauntingly, what if he was told? What if the story wasn't his, but inherited, passed down from traveler to scholar, from scribe to priest, from survivors who watched their world vanish beneath waves of water or sand? There are other strange anomalies near the eye. Just north lies the Adrar Plateau, filled with mysterious stone structures, ancient pathways, and long-abandoned oases. To the west, buried beneath dunes, lie what some believe are ancient caravanserais or outposts, built on trade routes that predate written history. And throughout the region there are signs of water erosion, valleys carved by streams that haven't existed for thousands of years. The entire landscape feels like a memory, not just of geography, but of something else, a pattern, a plan. For those who believe in the Atlantis connection, the eye represents more than evidence. It represents a key to a forgotten chapter of humanity, a chapter where civilization wasn't born once in Mesopotamia, but maybe many times and died many times, leaving only scars and echoes. They argue that the Richet structure wasn't just a city, but a capital, a spiritual center, a resonance point where architecture, astronomy, and the earth aligned, and when balance was broken, when pride or war or disaster struck, it all collapsed. The sea may not have swallowed it in waves of water, but in waves of silence. For skeptics, of course, the eye remains a geological marvel, beautiful, ancient, but ultimately explainable. They urge caution. Evidence, not dreams. Data, not mythology. And yet even they admit something about the eye is unsettling. It's too perfect, too symmetrical, too poetic. Nature may be wild, but rarely is it so composed. And while erosion can shape land in astonishing ways, it usually does so with chaos, not order. The Richet structure is order. In the end, maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe the eye was chosen, not made. Maybe an ancient people found this place and saw what we see now, something sacred, something cosmic, and they built around it, with it, within it. And when they were gone, the earth swallowed the bones, but left the spiral, a signature no storm could erase, a fingerprint of a dream. And now we stand on the edge of that memory, squinting through sand and science, wondering whether what we see is real or just the ghost of a story we were always meant to remember. Because whether or not the eye is Atlantis, it demands something from us. It demands that we ask, that we look deeper, that we let go of certainty and admit that the earth holds secrets, vast, patient secrets, that defy every map we've drawn. The Richet structure is real. It is there, and it is waiting. But for what? For who? And so the question grows louder, circling like the rings of the eye itself, round and round, drawing us in. If this was not Atlantis, then what was it? Before the pyramids stood tall, before the Nile even carved its sacred path through the heart of Egypt, before the names of Re, Osiris, and Isis echoed in temples of stone, there were whispers, whispers of a land to the west, a land where gods walked in human form, where knowledge was not discovered but remembered, and where the sky met the sand in an eternal conversation of symbols, stars, and secrets. Egyptian priests, the keepers of time and truth, spoke in hushed tones of a place beyond the desert. They called it the land of the West, not just as a poetic metaphor for death, but as a literal place, across the Sahara, where something ancient once lived and breathed. And though the Nile birthed a mighty civilization, the question that lingers like incense in forgotten tombs is this: did Egypt truly begin on the banks of the river, or did it inherit its soul from somewhere deeper, older and long buried beneath the desert's golden skin? The story begins with a paradox. Ancient Egypt, one of the most studied civilizations on Earth, seems to have appeared suddenly, fully formed, around 3100 BCE. The first dynasties emerged with writing, architecture, and religious systems already in place. The gods had names. The temples had orders. The pharaohs claimed divine bloodlines. It was as if someone turned a key, and civilization began. But who forged that key? Where did the knowledge come from? In the temples of Karnak and Luxor, in the scrolls of the priest Manetho, and in the echoes of oral traditions passed down through dynasties, there are repeated references to a time before Egypt, a time of pre-dynastic kings, and a lineage of god-kings who ruled not from the Nile, but from the desert. Inscriptions speak of the followers of Horus, beings of great power who came from the west, crossing the burning sands to seed order in the fertile crescent of the Nile. These were not mere myths. They were recorded history as understood by the very people who built the foundations of civilization. And then there are the Black Pharaohs. The 25th dynasty of Egypt, often called the Kushite dynasty, came from Nubia. to the south of Egypt. These rulers, dark-skinned and proud, reigned over Egypt, not as conquerors but as restorers. They reintroduced older religious practices, revived forgotten temple rituals, and claimed their right not by force but by blood. Pharaohs like Pi and Taharka didn't just wear the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. They claimed descent from a time before division, before Egypt itself. Nubia, often dismissed as a cultural satellite of Egypt, begins to look more and more like an origin point when viewed through the right lens. Their pyramids, smaller but more numerous than those of Giza, litter the sands of Sudan. Their gods were similar but not identical, emphasizing elements of the desert, of stars seen without the haze of Nile mist, of wind and silence and fire. And most curiously, their oral traditions spoke not of coming from the Nile but of moving toward it, from the west. Archaeological discoveries in modern Sudan and southern Libya have uncovered rock art and burial sites that predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. In the region known as the Tadrat Caucasus, and further west in the Tassili Najar of Algeria, cave paintings show figures adorned in ceremonial headdresses, performing what appear to be rituals, animals long extinct, boats in deserts, and human forms not bowed in labor, but raised in reverence. Some of these paintings show deities, figures larger than the others, marked by halos or auras. Their symbols are unfamiliar to mainstream Egyptology. Spirals, dots, concentric circles, not papyrus reeds or lotus flowers, not ankhs or scarabs, but something older, something wilder. And some of these gods wear the desert itself. There is one painting, almost faded now, that shows a figure with arms raised, surrounded by sand swirls, with the sun emerging from his chest. No Nile, no vegetation, only fire and dust and brilliance. Who was this being, and why does it feel like the desert's memory itself was personified? Egyptian mythology focuses heavily on the Nile, yet some of the earliest depictions of gods like Set, later demonized, originate in the desert as chaotic but vital forces. Could Set, the god of storms and deserts, once have been revered as a primal deity of the West, only later rewritten as a villain when the Nile rose in cultural dominance? Further intrigue comes from a lesser-known text, the Shabaka stone, found in Memphis, and now housed in the British Museum. This granite relic claims to be a copy of a far older, worm-eaten papyrus. It tells of the god Ptah, who existed before all things, who spoke the world into existence. But it also references a divine council, gods who deliberated long before kings ruled Egypt. This council, according to the stone, convened in the Western lands. Scholars debate the meaning. Some say it's symbolic of death. But what if it was literal? What if those Western lands were real? What if the council was not myth, but memory? And then there are the desert motifs in Egyptian symbology. While most focus on the lush iconography of the Nile, the lotus, the crocodile, the ibis, some temples include carvings of sandstorms, of jackals howling beneath desert moons, of stars etched, not in sky charts but in sequences designed to be read from the ground. The Dendera zodiac, an astonishing celestial diagram carved into the ceiling of a temple far south of Cairo, includes constellations and astronomical alignments that suggest knowledge of planetary movements far more advanced than previously thought. Some researchers argue it points to observations that would have required clear desert skies, skies found not along the misty Nile, but deep within the Sahara. Even the orientation of Egypt's earliest sacred sites seems to suggest a Western fixation. The pyramids of Giza, for instance, align not only with cardinal directions, but with star paths and celestial events tied to the western horizon. The West, in Egyptian belief, was where the sun died and the soul journeyed. But perhaps it was also where the soul came from. After all, the myth of Osiris, the first king, the resurrected god, speaks of dismemberment, burial, and resurrection. And where was Osiris buried? The legends say, in the West, always the West. Could it be that Egypt's obsession with death, resurrection, and the afterlife was not just spiritual but ancestral, that their reverence for the West was not symbolic but nostalgic, a longing for a homeland lost, not to war, but to time, to sand, to forgetting. The Black Pharaohs may have remembered their art, their architecture, their practices, though Egyptian in form, often hinted at origins elsewhere. Their pyramids, unlike the massive monuments at Giza, were steeper, clustered, almost humble, as if they were remembering a time when grandeur was not in size, but in sacred geometry. Their temples faced not only the Nile, but the desert. Their rituals included desert walks, fasts under the sun, and invocations spoken directly to the wind. They treated the West not just as a destination of the dead, but as the birthplace of the divine. And now modern archaeology begins to catch up. Deep in the deserts of southwestern Egypt, near the border with Libya, lies a site known as Nabta Playa. Here, long before the pyramids, a people erected stone circles aligned with the summer solstice. They built ceremonial centers. They buried cattle with ritual care, and they watched the stars. Nabta Playa predates Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. Its builders were not Nile dwellers. They were desert people. Their knowledge of astronomy rivals that of later civilizations, and their memory, it too, points west. If these people moved east as the desert dried, if they followed the retreating rains toward the Nile, then perhaps Egypt was not their origin, but their refuge, a place to restart what had been lost, to carry the flame forward. And in doing so they preserved not just knowledge but a haunting reverence for what they had left behind. The gods, the rituals, the myths, they all contain shadows of something older, a civilization not remembered in textbooks, but in stone alignments, forgotten symbols, and the quiet way Egyptian priests always looked west when they spoke of where the gods came from. So now we are left with a strange image. Egypt, standing like a titan of time, may not be the beginning, but the echo, a brilliant golden echo of a voice far older, swallowed by sand and silence. The priests knew. The Black Pharaohs remembered. The gods still wore desert crowns, and somewhere beneath dunes or stars the truth remains, half buried, half spoken, always just beyond reach. And the question that remains, carved not in stone but in the wind that howls through forgotten valleys, is this: did Egypt inherit more than we know? In 2018, something unexpected emerged from the lifeless silence of the Sahara, not through shovel or spade, but through the cold, glowing eye of a satellite orbiting far above Earth. What it saw was not new land or water, but shadows, shadows of something once alive, once buried, and entirely forgotten. Hidden beneath centuries of drifting sand were long rows of unusual soil patterns, perfectly spaced, stretching out like ghostly veins beneath the dunes. When infrared scans were layered onto the imagery, a darker truth emerged. These weren't just lines in the sand, they were tombs, hundreds of them, thousands even, and not a single one bore a name, no hieroglyphics, no carved stone, no monuments, just human remains, scattered beneath a desert that of their burial had not yet become a desert. What the archaeologists had stumbled upon was not just a graveyard, it was a civilization's final breath, preserved in silence, erased from every page of history. They called it the Green Sahara Burial Field, but the truth was far less clinical. This was a city of the dead, built by people no one remembered, belonging to a culture no one could name, and filled with the bones of men, women, and children who lived and died over 9,000 years ago, and no one had told their story until now. It wasn't supposed to be there. The Sahara, we are told, has always been a barrier, an endless sea of dunes that separated empires, suffocated caravans, and buried time itself. But this find shattered that illusion. Located near the region of Gobero, in present-day Niger, what scientists uncovered was perhaps the oldest known graveyard in the entire Sahara. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. These weren't bodies lost to famine or disease. They were buried, deliberately, respectfully, ritually. The bodies were placed in sleeping positions. Some were arranged facing the rising sun. Others held hands, even in death. A few wore necklaces made of ivory or shells, carried blades carved from stone, or were buried with offerings. Animal bones, tools, mysterious objects whose purpose is still unknown. One of the most haunting discoveries was that of a woman and two children, buried together in a tender embrace, the bones so perfectly preserved that even the expression of protection seemed to linger. They weren't just buried, they were mourned. The soil itself told stories. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest graves at nearly 10,000 years old, thousands of years before the first dynasties of Egypt, before the earliest cities of Mesopotamia, even before the wheel had been invented. These were not scattered hunter-gatherers living in makeshift camps. The density of the graves, the uniformity of burial, the presence of ritual objects all suggested structure, culture, identity, and yet no writing, no carvings, no names. Whoever these people were, they vanished without leaving behind a single word. The surrounding terrain gave more clues. It wasn't always sand. Around 9,000 years ago, the Sahara was lush, a world of lakes, grasslands, and slow-moving rivers that carried water across what is now lifeless rock. Fish bones found near the graves indicated the people ate perch and catfish. Nearby, tools for farming and fishing were discovered. Hooks, spears, grinding stones. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And more chillingly, this cemetery wasn't used by one single group across time. It was used by at least two entirely different populations, separated by thousands of years, who buried their dead in the same sacred place. The earlier group, tall and robust, built their lives around hunting and fishing. The later group, smaller and more delicate, practiced early agriculture and animal domestication. Two cultures, two lost civilizations, meeting in death and forgotten in life. How do thousands of people vanish without a trace? How does a civilization build an entire burial culture and leave behind no cities, no palaces, no pyramids, no stories? Part of the answer may lie in the earth itself. As the Sahara dried, the rains retreated north. The lakes evaporated. Rivers turned to dust. What was once paradise became hell. Those who remained were swallowed by famine, forced to flee or buried where they stood. But even if their cities were made of wood or reed, even if their homes dissolved with the climate, why were there no oral histories? No echoes of their memory in the myths of the Nile or the legends of the Berbers or the scrolls of the Greeks? Unless someone erased them, not out of malice but out of silence, unless time simply forgot. It wasn't just Gobro. As satellite imaging became more advanced, similar patterns began to appear elsewhere across Mauritania, Algeria, and Libya. Isolated burial clusters, shallow mounds, hidden alignments in the terrain. In one particularly remote area of southern Algeria, archaeologists found a ring of stones surrounding dozens of graves. Some of the stones had been purposefully placed to frame the horizon. When scanned for alignment, the structure pointed to the setting of Sirius, the dog star, sacred in both Egyptian and pre-dynastic cosmology. Could these people have worshipped the stars? Did they chart the heavens while the rest of humanity still wandered? If so, who taught them? One theory suggests that these people may have been precursors to the Nile Valley civilizations, that as the Sahara dried, they migrated eastward, bringing with them knowledge of astronomy, burial customs, and early social structures. If true, it would mean that Egypt did not rise alone, but stood on the bones of forgotten ancestors. It would mean that those who built the tombs at Goboro, and those buried without names, were the true beginning of civilization in Africa, not as conquerors but as survivors, silent teachers whose memories lived on in stone but not in story. Yet another theory, more controversial, argues that these burial fields are remnants of a civilization we never knew existed. Not just a lost people, but a lost world. A society that rose in isolation during the Green Sahara period and left behind nothing but graves, because graves were all that mattered. No cities, no monuments, only the sacred act of death. Perhaps their culture revered the afterlife so deeply that the world of the living was merely a passage. Perhaps their greatest works were never meant to be seen by the eyes of the living, but guarded by sand and watched by stars. Perhaps that is why we find only bones and silence. But silence doesn't last forever. In recent years, researchers working with ground-penetrating radar discovered even deeper burial layers beneath Gobero. Some are believed to be over 11,000 years old. The dead here were buried in fetal positions, surrounded by animal bones and primitive jewelry. Others were laid flat with their faces turned west, and still no writing, no symbols, no names, just the enduring truth that someone loved them enough to bury them with care, that someone stood over their grave thousands of years ago and whispered goodbye. Why have we never heard of them? Why isn't this discovery in textbooks, in museums, in documentaries? Part of it, perhaps, is the remoteness. Gobero is nearly unreachable, a place where modern vehicles break down, where temperatures melt equipment, where sandstorms can swallow tents whole. But part of it too is our blindness. We have trained ourselves to look for greatness in pyramids, in palaces, in war. We honor the civilizations that conquered, that carved their names into mountains, but we forget the quiet ones, the ones who loved their dead, the ones who watched the sky, who fished and farmed and faded, not with violence but with dignity. There are voices now in the academic world calling for deeper research into the prehistoric Sahara, but funding is scarce. Governments are hesitant, military zones intersect with promising sites, and the desert, as always, guards her secrets well. But something has shifted. The graves are calling, the unnamed tombs are rising in our consciousness, and soon we may have no choice but to answer. The question remains, who were these people? Were they the first civilization of Africa, older than Sumer, older than Egypt? Were they migrants from even older lands, perhaps pushed by climate change into the interior of the continent before the world knew cities? Or were they something else entirely, a people who never wanted to be remembered in stories, but only in silence? There is a loneliness in these graves that speaks louder than any hieroglyph, a loneliness that echoes across millennia and begs not for fame but for remembrance. They lived, they loved, they died, and someone buried them. And now, with the satellites watching and the winds shifting, their tombs have returned to light, not to haunt us, but to remind us that even the nameless deserve to be known. So we must ask, who buried their dead in the desert? And why have we never heard of them? There are moments in Earth's history when everything changes, not slowly, not gently, but with a suddenness so violent it leaves scars that never heal. And as we walk upon the burning skin of the Sahara, what we see is not just sand. We see trauma, silence, a wound, a memory of something terrible that came not from within the earth, but from above. For thousands of years, the Sahara was not a desert. It was green, wet, alive, a land of lakes, rivers, birds, and cattle. But then something happened, something abrupt. The lakes vanished. The grass turned to dust. And the people, those unknown builders of tombs, watchers of stars, caretakers of the dead, they disappeared. Scientists have long blamed gradual climate change, shifting monsoons, and the tilt of the earth. But what if it wasn't slow? What if the Sahara didn't become a desert? What if it was turned into one, not by drought, but by fire, by force, by something that fell from the sky, like judgment? And what if the people who lived there saw it coming? Across northern Africa, scattered in strange, lonely places, lie fragments of green glass, shards of a material called Libyan desert glass, found nowhere else on Earth in such purity. It is not volcanic. It is not man-made. It is glass forged by temperatures so intense that no natural wildfire or heat wave could explain its creation. Theories swirl like wind around it. Was it formed by lightning, by volcanic explosions? None fit. The most accepted explanation today is both simple and terrifying. An asteroid, or perhaps a comet, struck the Earth thousands of years ago, exploding in the air before touching ground, its heat wave vaporizing everything beneath it in an instant. Temperatures reached over 3,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt the desert's surface into glass. It left no crater, but it left a memory, and that memory may be the key to everything. But this isn't just about glass. Around the same regions where Libyan desert glass is found, there are signs of ancient habitation, burial grounds, tools, and strange stone circles aligned with the stars. Whoever lived there was not primitive. They were observant, and then they were gone. Not gradually, not through migration, but all at once. Gone like smoke, as if the sun itself had come down and erased them. Satellite scans of the Sahara show strange circular depressions, blast patterns, far more symmetrical than anything erosion should create. Some resemble the footprints of massive explosions, their edges charred, their soil altered, and buried beneath them. Nothing, no bones, no artifacts, as if life was simply plucked from the earth, leaving behind only shadows. And the glass, it tells a story. When scientists studied its formation, they found signs of vaporized zircon, a mineral that transforms only under extreme pressure and heat, the kind found in nuclear detonations or asteroid strikes. Whatever happened in the Sahara, it wasn't gentle. It was violent, fast, and final. The question is, did it come without warning, or were the people already looking to the sky? Cave art from the Sahara, especially in the regions of Tassili Najer and Gilf Kebir, contains strange images, figures with elongated heads, beings with halos, and most unsettling of all, radiant objects in the sky. Some resemble suns, but not like any sun we know. These are spiked, exploding, descending. In one painting, a line of people is shown facing upward, hands raised, not in worship, but in alarm. Behind them, animals flee. In another, a massive spiral hovers above the horizon, and beneath it, the land appears to crack. For decades, these drawings were dismissed as symbolic. But what if they were memories? What if they were warnings? Ancient oral traditions from tribes in the Sahara, Tuareg, Berber, and even some Nilotic groups speak of a time when the sky was angry, a time when the gods hurled fire, a time when the stars fell and the lakes boiled. These were passed down through generations long before science tried to explain the glass in the sand. The Dogon people of Mali, famous for their inexplicable knowledge of Sirius B, an invisible star only recently confirmed by telescopes, claim their ancestors came from a time when the earth was not safe. They say something fell, something burned, and something ended. Geologists admit that around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, there was a sudden acceleration in desertification across the Sahara. Before that, the land supported millions. After that, it became hostile, dry, and nearly uninhabitable. The transition wasn't smooth. It was sharp. Pollen records vanish. Sediment layers show abrupt drying. Lake beds go from lush to lifeless in mere centuries. And most striking of all, archaeological sites stop. Tools, bones, structures, everything disappears from the record. It's not just one area, it's everywhere, as if a giant reset button was pressed. Some point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a controversial theory suggesting that multiple comet fragments struck Earth around 12,800 years ago, triggering a mini ice age and wiping out early cultures. While that date may not align precisely with the Sahara's shift, it proves one chilling truth: cosmic disasters do happen. They have shaped our world before, and perhaps they did it again. But this time, the victims weren't mammoths or glaciers. This time, it may have been a forgotten civilization, one that had no writing, no towering monuments, but a soul worth remembering. And what if they saw it coming? At sites like Nabta Playa, stone circles older than Stonehenge, early Saharan people built alignments tracking solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. They weren't guessing. They were measuring. They watched the heavens closely. If a celestial body had appeared, growing in brightness, approaching day by day, they would have seen it. They may not have known what it was, but they would have known it was not right. Perhaps their rituals grew desperate. Perhaps the last burials were rushed. Perhaps some tried to flee, leaving graves half dug, fires still lit. And then it came, not as a flame, but as a light, not as rain, but as heat. A white, blinding wind that turned the lakes to vapor and the forests to ash. And when it was over, there was silence. The survivors, if any remained, would have wandered east, toward the Nile, toward refuge. They would have carried stories, myths, warnings. Perhaps they became the first priests of Egypt, their words becoming whispers in temple halls. Perhaps the myth of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess sent to burn humanity, was born from their memory. Perhaps the tale of a flood destroying the world, found in so many ancient cultures, began not with water but with fire. We don't know for sure. We may never know, but the signs are there. The glass in the desert, the sudden emptiness in the archaeological record, the stories carved in stone and painted on walls, the lost green world beneath our feet, and the graves, those quiet, nameless graves scattered across the Sahara, tell us that people were here, people who loved, fought, built, and prayed, people who faced something beyond comprehension, people who in their final moments may have looked to the sky not with wonder, but with fear. Today, we walk their graveyard and call it a desert. We forget that deserts are not born, they are made. The Sahara was once alive, and then something burned it into silence. And the question that lingers, hot, heavy, unspoken, is this: what if they knew it was coming? Maps are not just tools, they're stories, stories of what we know, and more disturbingly of what we choose not to. And when it comes to the vast, endless dunes of the Sahara, it's what's missing from the maps that speaks the loudest. Because this desert, stretching over 9 million square kilometers, bigger than the United States, isn't just a sea of sand, it's a locked vault, and some parts of it are guarded like treasure. For decades, oddities have been noticed by historians, satellite analysts, and desert travelers alike. Areas with coordinates but no names, stretches where old French colonial maps once marked ruins, but modern ones show nothing, regions blurred or blacked out on Google Earth, and vast swaths labelled only as military zones. At first glance, it seems like routine national security until you start connecting the dots, until you hear the stories of expeditions turned away at gunpoint, of researchers silenced, of discoveries made, and then made to disappear. Why is it that in a world where satellites can read license plates from space, there are still places we are not allowed to see? And who is benefiting from this collective silence? Let's begin with the maps. During the colonial era, particularly under French rule in North Africa, explorers and military surveyors mapped the Sahara with obsessive precision. Many of these early maps, now mostly locked in archives in Paris or Algiers, contain references to ancient structures, unusual depressions, or ruined cities in regions now deemed completely empty. Some locations bear labels like structures cyclopéennes or forteresse antique, suggesting something massive, man-made and old. Yet today, those same regions on official maps are marked as no data, or worse, as blank. Why did those place names vanish? Were the ruins misidentified natural formations, or were they erased on purpose? Then there's Google Earth. Civilian satellite imagery has opened up much of the planet to public scrutiny, but the Sahara tells a different story. In several regions of southern Algeria, northern Mali, western Libya, and deep Mauritania, tiles are blurred, low resolution, or entirely missing. Some of the most suspicious areas lie near known archaeological interest points, like the Tassili Najer Plateau, home to some of the most intricate and mysterious cave art on Earth. Why would such places be rendered in grainy distortion when nearby sand dunes are shown in perfect clarity? In 2021, a team of amateur satellite researchers published a forum thread showing a cluster of suspicious circular anomalies near the Algerian border, surrounded by nothing but desert. Within a month, the coordinates no longer loaded properly. The thread was deleted. The users stopped posting. But perhaps the most disturbing are the stories, the first-hand accounts whispered between researchers, journalists, and adventurers who tried to go where they weren't supposed to. One such account comes from a Belgian geologist who, in 2004, attempted to access a dry lake bed in southern Algeria that early maps suggested held unusual stone alignments. He was stopped by Algerian soldiers, his permits revoked on the spot, and his equipment confiscated. They told him the area was under hydrological observation, a phrase that in context made no sense. Another story involves a British desert explorer who, in the late 1990s, vanished along with his entire team while crossing a restricted part of the Libyan Sahara. Official reports claimed sandstorm, but satellite data from that day shows clear skies. A single transmission was intercepted. One sentence, "There's something out here. I can't describe it." No bodies were found. Even more unsettling is the role of intelligence agencies. Declassified documents from the CIA, dating back to the Cold War, reference archaeological anomalies in North Africa that were deemed potentially strategic. What does that mean? One memo, buried deep in a batch released under the Freedom of Information Act, mentioned a structure of unknown origin visible in 1962 satellite imagery in western Mauritania. The memo was addressed not to archaeologists but to military strategists. Why would ancient ruins concern the Pentagon? Unless those ruins weren't just ruins, unless they were something else, something not yet understood, something that still had value. There is a pattern. Restricted zones are not random. They often overlap with places tied to legends. Oral histories of great cities swallowed by sand, of burning stones falling from the sky, of ancient knowledge guarded by tribes that vanished without a trace. The Tuareg people, indigenous to the Central Sahara, speak of a time when the desert was not silent, when the fathers of knowledge lived in great circular cities made of white stone. They say these cities still exist, beneath the dunes, and that some outsiders have already found them, and been stopped. Mauritania is particularly suspicious. The Richet structure, or the Eye of the Sahara, lies within a heavily monitored zone. Officially, it's open, but expeditions beyond the tourist perimeter are routinely denied. In 2019, a German team attempted to survey the center of the eye with ground-penetrating radar. After 2 days, they were ordered to leave. No reason given. Their scans, briefly published, showed subsurface anomalies consistent with cavities or tunnels. Within weeks, their site was taken down. One of the lead researchers later told a friend, anonymously, that they had seen something impossible. And this brings us to the uncomfortable question. What could be buried in the Sahara that powerful nations want kept hidden? It can't just be gold or oil or minerals. Those are too common, too well known. Could it be technology? Evidence of ancient civilizations whose existence would rewrite history? Could it be the remains of cities older than Egypt, older than Sumer, cities that prove our timeline is wrong? Or something darker still? Evidence of contact, of influence from beyond what we consider terrestrial. Whispers from within the intelligence community speak of geohistoric interest sites, a coded term, never defined, that appears in internal documents referencing not just the Sahara, but places like Antarctica and the Amazon. Are we to believe these sites are merely geological, or is there a shared thread, locations where something was found that challenged the official narrative of human history? Another theory suggests the silence is strategic. If ancient structures built with unknown methods or aligned with unexplained precision were acknowledged publicly, it could trigger cultural destabilization. Religions might fracture. Historical authority would collapse. Funding would shift from military dominance to historical truth. Some nations, particularly those built on modern identities, might not want that, so they bury the past, Not in sand, but in paperwork, in silence, in denial. Meanwhile, the desert waits. It is no coincidence that drones are now banned in large parts of the Sahara, that scientific permits are slow-walked or outright denied, that journalists are quietly warned to avoid certain stories. This isn't just about security. It's about control of a story that, if told, could change everything. Because what if the civilizations buried beneath the Sahara were not mythical but real? What if they possessed knowledge that we have only now begun to rediscover? Astronomy, engineering, environmental harmony. What if their fall wasn't due to weakness, but to something they couldn't stop, something that came from the sky, as discussed in the last episode? And what if they left behind evidence? Clues, messages carved in stone, stored in vaults, buried deep in mountains or under collapsed cities. And what if, just what if, someone found it? There are theories that certain governments are already studying relics from these lost civilizations, that recovered objects too complex for the known timeline have been taken into private labs, that discoveries made by early explorers were never lost, but classified, that the reason you've never heard about entire burial complexes under the sands of Niger, or the purpose of the stone spirals in Libya, is because someone somewhere made the decision that you weren't supposed to. But history doesn't like being buried. It finds cracks in the silence. It seeps through the internet, through declassified papers, through the voice of a child who asks why a certain part of the map is always blurry. And one day, someone will dig where they were told not to, and when that happens, the truth will rise. So we're left with a question not of archaeology, but of intent. Who benefits from this being forgotten? Who gains power by erasing the past? Who protects their story by burning someone else's? Because the moment we remember fully, deeply, collectively, what the Sahara once was, is the moment we stop believing the version of history we've been given. And that is what scares them most. The wind moves differently here, as if it remembers, as if it's trying to speak, but we've forgotten the language. For 10 episodes we've wandered the Sahara together, uncovering buried tombs with no names, glass formed by fire from the sky, maps that lie, and stories whispered by civilizations no longer present in textbooks, but still alive beneath the sand. And now we arrive at the final question. After the deserts burned and the waters vanished, after the people disappeared and the satellites went blind, after the explorers were silenced and the ruins ignored, what remains? What was buried is not lost, because what we've uncovered isn't just the bones of a forgotten people. It's a civilization that once thrived, that once shaped the very story of what it means to be human, and that still, in shadow and silence, might be shaping us now. The signs were never scattered. They were scattered for us, deliberately disassembled across centuries and borders, hidden in plain sight, and quietly rearranged until all that was left were myths and coincidences. But when you look closer, when you stand back and listen to the desert breathe, you begin to see that it was never random. The green Sahara, with its rivers and lakes and astronomical monuments, wasn't just a cradle for early tribes. It was a stage for a complex society, one that built, mapped, worshipped, calculated, traded, not in isolation, not in prehistory, but in a timeline that stretches right up against the rise of Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley. All those first sparks of civilization, we're told, appeared magically. Maybe they weren't the beginning. Maybe they were the aftershocks. Because before the pharaohs stood, before the ziggurats rose, before the great ships crossed the Mediterranean, someone had already been watching the stars. Someone had already been drawing circles in stone that aligned with Sirius and Orion. Someone had already been burying their dead with care, wearing jewelry, carrying knives of polished stone, and walking among spiral cities made of white rock now crushed beneath dunes. The oldest maps, drawn not by conquerors but by travelers, tell us of these cities. Arab historians spoke of golden kingdoms west of the Nile. The Greeks described massive inland lakes with people who wore flowing robes and spoke of gods who came before memory. French colonial explorers logged coordinates of massive stone formations and ancient causeways in Algeria and Mauritania. Then those maps vanished. Satellite scans caught glimpses of foundations shaped like mandalas, concentric walls like those described in Plato's Atlantis. But those images were pulled, downgraded, classified, and the few expeditions that went too far into the wrong regions of the Sahara, gone, stopped, turned away, or disappeared into dust. You're told they were lost to the desert, but what if they found something they weren't supposed to? This isn't fantasy. The desert itself holds the proof. Beneath the surface are fossilized lakes, networks of dry riverbeds that once rivaled the Nile in scale. In satellite imagery, you can trace the paths of ancient waterways connecting areas where burials, cave art, and lost settlements have been found, all stretching from Sudan to Mali. It's not a string of isolated events. It's a map of a world that once existed. One culture, evolving and spreading across the now-dead heart of Africa. At Gobero in Niger, the oldest known cemetery in the Sahara tells of a people who lived not for survival, but with structure and ceremony, the way they buried their dead, some embracing, some adorned with tools or beads, suggests a belief system, a cosmology, something far beyond subsistence. And nearby, in Libya and Algeria, art carved into stone cliffs reveals gods with halos, celestial beings, and boats crossing deserts long before seas were known. They painted what they saw. So who were these beings in the sky? Why the obsession with the stars? The deeper you look, the more unsettling it becomes, because across continents you begin to see patterns, spirals, sunbursts, circular cities. From the rich structure in Mauritania to the city rings of Caral in Peru, from Malta's temples to the buried mounds in Turkey, the same symbols emerge. Cultural crossover, we're told. Coincidence. But what if it's continuity? What if this ancient Saharan civilization was not just advanced, but influential? What if it didn't disappear entirely, but migrated, leaving pieces of itself in the DNA of future empires? The Nubians, the Berbers, the Dogon, they all tell stories of ancestors who came from a lost homeland in the West, across lands now cursed by sand. Even in Egypt, the priesthood spoke of knowledge brought from the West, of gods and teachers who came from a land swallowed by disaster. They never called themselves the first. They said they were continuing something older. But that older thing, that source, never got a name. It got buried. And the question no one dares ask is why. Why are we told again and again that there was nothing here before the Nile? Why are the findings in the Sahara downplayed, redacted, or silenced? Why are military zones carved out around the most promising sites? Why are maps erased, expeditions blocked, drones banned? Perhaps because whoever controls the past controls the present. If we acknowledge that an African civilization existed in the deep past, one that predated and perhaps seeded later powers, then the entire framework of firsts collapses, and with it, the illusion of linear progress, that we came from caves and slowly climbed upward. That genius is rare and recent, that only one region, one race, one timeline led us here. But if the Sahara once held cities with roads, astronomy, rituals, and trade, then history doesn't ascend. It loops, it forgets, it buries, and that changes everything. So what really happened? If they were so advanced, where did they go? The answer may lie in the sky. As we explored in earlier episodes, the Sahara's transformation from paradise to wasteland may not have been gradual. It may have been catastrophic. The green world of lakes and forests vanished rapidly, possibly after an asteroid or comet event, one hot enough to melt sand into glass. The Libyan desert glass found scattered across the region is formed at temperatures beyond natural wildfire. It had to come from above, and if a massive airburst or impact occurred, it could have triggered sudden desertification, killing crops, poisoning water, driving people to flee. And in the chaos, cities were abandoned, memories scattered, time buried, but they didn't vanish completely. Survivors carried what they could: knowledge, beliefs, star maps, rituals, and they brought them to new lands, the Nile Valley, the Sahel, perhaps even across the sea. And so the story didn't end. It just got rewritten. Now, at the edge of this journey, you begin to see it. The burial fields, the forgotten maps, the overlapping myths, the military silence, the unexplainable ruins, the cosmic fire, the cultural echoes, all threads in a web once torn, now slowly reweaving itself. This lost civilization, whatever it was called, whoever its people were, didn't just exist. It mattered. It shaped us. Its fingerprints are on the foundations of our most sacred stories. Its memory lives in our symbols, our architecture, our sky law. Its fall is our warning. Its burial, our mistake. Because what was buried, Ali, is not lost. It's under our feet, in our myths, whispered by wind, reflected in glass, painted on stone, waiting for someone to dig without permission, waiting for someone to listen without filters, waiting for someone to remember. And now that you've seen all 10 episodes, now that the pieces are finally laid out before you, the question is no longer if there was a lost civilization beneath the Sahara. The question is, why were we never told? They say the past is behind us, but sometimes the past is staring right at us, hidden in the very maps we ignore. Somewhere between folklore and fact, there exists a collection of ancient maps that should not exist, at least not with the knowledge available at the time. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, shows the coast of Antarctica without ice. The Bochet map reveals mountain ranges beneath the southern polar cap centuries before modern radar confirmed them. But it's not just Antarctica. These maps, often dismissed, also depict detailed inland topography of North Africa, rivers and cities deep in the Sahara where today there's only emptiness. Some show massive lakes, flowing rivers, even settlements aligned along precise latitudes and longitudes, long before longitude was supposed to have been invented. How did they know? Who drew these maps? Some of them, like those used by Portuguese navigators and Arab scholars, are said to have come from older sources. But older than what? Older than written history itself. These maps weren't sketches, they were replications, copies of something once whole, something now lost. Scholars argue, dismiss and deflect, calling them fantasies or lucky guesses. But there's a growing suspicion that these ancient cartographers were not guessing. They were preserving memory. Memory of a time when the world looked different, when seas reached farther, deserts were alive, and people moved between lands now cut off by ocean or sand. The symbols used on these maps, spirals, eyes, stars, match those carved into rocks in Libya, Algeria, and even South America. Could it be that these were pieces of a global map, once known to a civilization long forgotten, one that understood geometry, astronomy, and perhaps even Earth's shape centuries, millennia, before we're told it was discovered? If so, why were these maps hidden away in private libraries, military archives, and royal vaults? Why did they resurface only when colonial empires needed forgotten knowledge to navigate? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, why do modern governments still quietly guard certain sections of these maps, classifying parts, blurring coordinates, or outright denying their accuracy? Because if the maps are real, if they are fragments of a lost knowledge system, then the official version of history isn't just wrong, it's been rewritten, and those who dared to preserve the truth did so in ink and silence. So we're left to wonder, who were the original map makers, and why did they want us to remember a world that no longer exists? There's a limit to how far back we're allowed to look, beyond the pyramids, beyond Sumer, beyond the walls of Göbekli Tepe. Officially, civilization began around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. But what if that's just where the memory begins, not where the truth begins? Across the globe, in Africa, South America, India, and even under the oceans, there are signs of advanced human activity that defy the accepted timeline. monolithic structures buried beneath the earth, roads submerged beneath the sea, caves that show celestial alignments from 10,000 years ago. But the Sahara holds something more chilling, not just ruins, but traces of a forgotten intelligence. Stone circles aligned perfectly to solstices, burial grounds older than civilization itself, tools made with techniques that shouldn't have existed, and whispers from oral traditions that speak of a people who knew the stars before they knew the wheel. But these aren't isolated stories. They echo in the Andes, in Tamil Nadu, in Aboriginal Dreamtime, different continents, different languages, but the same message: we came from a world that fell, a world of knowledge, balance, harmony, and then destruction, climate change, fire from the sky, shifting lands, rising seas, and then silence, not extinction, amnesia. The survivors lived on, but in fear. They carried fragments of stories, of rituals, of warnings, and as new civilizations rose, they turned those memories into myths, into religion, into mystery, and in doing so, they buried the truth even deeper. Until now, because the evidence is rising again, the sand is shifting, the timelines are cracking. What we thought was the dawn of civilization may only be the second act. The first act lies under miles of rock, beneath cities, and in stories we were told not to take seriously. It lies in star maps older than agriculture, in megaliths placed with precision we can't explain, in civilizations that rose too fast, too early, with no transition. What if the Sahara was only one piece? What if the fall of that desert world was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a global collapse, a reset? And what if now, as we awaken to the edges of our ancient memory, we're being given a second chance to remember who we were and what we lost? Because maybe the truth was never completely destroyed, maybe it was protected, hidden, passed on in riddles and ruins. Maybe those who came before us knew this would happen again, and maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for us to remember the world before time, beneath the cities, beneath the ruins, beneath even the sand. There is something stranger than lost temples or forgotten languages. There is a structure that is not human, and the deeper we dig, the more we realize that civilization may not have just disappeared. It may have been built on top of something else entirely. Across the Sahara, and far beyond it, lie patterns too big to see unless you're in the sky. Gigantic lines, geometric ridges, spirals carved into landforms, impossible to make without flight or satellite-level vision. And yet, they're there. Some stretch for hundreds of miles. Others connect sacred sites across borders, deserts, even oceans. The ancients couldn't have known about these patterns. But what if they weren't the first to build? What if they were the last to remember? What if long before our history books began, someone or something was already carving meaning into the bones of the earth? Not just for beauty, not just for ritual, but as a message, a memory, a warning. In the Algerian desert, recent satellite scans show grid-like formations buried under sand, so deep it predates known human habitation. In Egypt, researchers found magnetic anomalies under the Western Plateau, perfectly circular, evenly spaced, stretching for kilometers. And in Mauritania, at the edges of the Richat structure, the ground pulses with faint, rhythmic vibrations no one can explain. They don't come from tectonic activity. They're not seismic, but they're regular, as if something deep underground is still running. And then there are the stones. Everywhere stone circles, megaliths, slabs, placed with a precision that defies logic. Not just on the surface, but aligning with underground features, fault lines, magnetic poles, and even constellations. As if whoever built them wasn't just marking land, they were tuning it, using the earth like a giant instrument. And maybe they were. What if the ancients didn't just inherit a forgotten civilization, but a living machine, a network, a grid, a planetary system designed to harmonize nature, energy, and memory? And they didn't know how to rebuild it, only how to protect it. The Dogon speak of knowledge, passed down from beings who came before time, who aligned Earth with Sirius, who warned of imbalance. In India, temple blueprints describe vibration channels under shrines. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch into endless geometric expressions of something too large to understand. And in the Sahara, the sand itself seems to cover the final pieces, massive ground structures too old for dating, too symmetrical for nature, and too quiet to ignore. Could it be that what we call civilization is just a layer, thin and recent, built over the corpse of something far older? Something not lost by war or weather, but buried intentionally to be remembered only when we were ready. Maybe that time is now, because the earth is shifting, technology is catching up, and eyes are opening, and maybe, just maybe, someone somewhere designed the earth as a message, not just to survive the fall of empires, but to guide the next ones. So we're left to wonder, what happens when we realize the earth isn't just a planet, but a memory?